As we have people starting to log on to the event, I would like to introduce what this event is. This is Hanging Out with Education. It's an opportunity for educators around the country to get together, talk shop, play with ideas, explore possibilities, and really just look at our craft and how we can learn from each other in a very informal setting. I'm joined today live with David Rosen.
Hi, everybody.
And I know we have a number of people who are jumping on the event page. And for those of you who are not used to what that looks like, let me share that by sharing my screen. On the event page, you will see an image on the top that will have a big play button on it. And if you wish to view the session, you can always click on that button and you'll be able to type in questions here and we'll be able to see those as well. So tonight's topic is origami and how it relates to mathematics. And I want to start by just asking people a question that I get asked by adult learners all the time. What is that whole square root thing all about? And I'm going to use a document camera tonight. And let me share that screen so you can see what that looks like. I have a square piece of paper here. And I've put down that this is 16 square units. So it may be carpeting, I'm trying to cover a floor or some surface. And I might ask students, well, how many units would this square be? And immediately they start pulling out a ruler and they start measuring and they say, well, this is 4 inches by 4 inches because they measure it. And I say, well, what if this wasn't exactly 16? And I might change the number to something like 64. Now I did choose 64 very strategically, and we'll see why in a minute. I'll go back to the 16. I asked the students, all right, you measured 4 by 4, but this says square units. Is there a way we can make 16 equal squares inside this shape? And I asked them to play around with that a little bit with a partner, and they'll fold it, usually in half, and then they'll fold it again, and they'll make a bunch of folds, and they'll be trying to make equal squares. After they fold it in half and then fold it in half again, I stop them right there and ask them, are those perfect squares and how would they know? And they come up with some ideas about triangles and the diagonals have to be the same. And they find out that, okay, there are 4 perfect squares here, 2 units on each side. And then they fold this again, anticipating where we're going with this. And they start finding out that, I will take this one that's already folded, there comes out to be 16 equal squares if we have 4 units by 4 units. So the idea of exponents and taking roots, particularly square roots, is very easy to demonstrate with a piece of paper and folding techniques. And I would encourage you to ask questions that lead students through this discovery. Again, because we only have about an hour together, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that tonight, simply because I have some really neat models I wish to share with you. I'm going to jump over to the questions just to see if there's any questions so far. Okay. Lisa is saying on her end, the video is paused. If anyone else is watching and sees this as paused, I don't know if they would actually be able to hear my voice in the first place. Okay. Let me ask in the chat. It's asking Lisa and anybody else who's watching, is the video still paused? And we'll see if that comes up. Oh, it does say, okay, up to date. Okay. Good. So let's take a look at some origami models. I'm going to turn right back. And David says it's not paused for him. Good. I'm going to show you a model that students love to learn. This is a transforming origami. It looks like a wreath, but if you push on the sides, it slowly starts to transform into a star. And when you show that to learners, they're like, okay, that's really cool, especially if it's around the holidays. They like this idea that they can make something out of paper that they then can play with and manipulate. This is all made out of one type of unit. And I might ask a number of different questions about geometry based on how many pieces do you think are in this unit. I use different colors to help indicate how many different pieces may be in here. I might ask questions about basic shapes. You know, is this an octagon? Is it a septagon? Is it a hexagon? You know, all these different shape identifications. You may even ask them, what are these colored shapes? How would you name those? And that gets a little tricky because you'll notice up here where my finger is, that's a side as well. So they frequently forget to count this side. They'll immediately whip out that there's, you know, 4 sides and forget that there's this fifth side right here. So you have many questions you can ask at this point, but of course they want to get right in and get building. So to do that, if you can grab a piece of paper, and if you don't have a piece of paper, this will be recorded so you can try this as well later on. And I'm going to ask you to fold it in half. Now, when you're folding, some advice for those of you who have not folded much, I will line up this side right here where my finger is, and I'll try to line that up by pushing the paper against my fingers, and then I'll just pinch right in the middle. And that gives me this big bulge right here. I'm going to lightly tap that all the way down. What that does is it starts forming a crease without moving this edge that I have lined up very much. When this is lightly creased, I can now push down on a table or a hard surface, run my finger or run a fingernail down it to make a nice strong crease. Believe it or not, there are some countries where students sit there and practice just making a perfect fold for a good amount of time each day. I think that would get boring and repetitious, but they would get very precise. The next thing we're going to do is make something called an airplane fold. You're going to take the top corner, fold that down to the middle line that you just created. And of course, I'm using yellow paper, so you can't see the lines very well. Let me adjust the light here a little, so that's a little darker. So I have made a right triangle. I might ask them, what kind of right triangle is this? This is an isosceles right triangle. This distance is equal to this one. And I might ask them, how could I prove that that is an isosceles triangle? Students will come up with many different adventurous ways to explain how that is an isosceles right triangle. I'm going to duplicate that on the other side. This is a typical fold that people would use when they're making a paper airplane. When making an airplane, you would then fold these two halves together. To end up with a shape that looks like this. I'm going to take our airplane and I'm going to transform it into a cow. I know it seems like it's very hard to imagine this as a cow, but our airplane can actually stand on its 4 feet. So if you look, this is one of the front feet, there's a back foot, and the other side has a front foot and a back foot. This is, of course, the nose of the cow. And this backside here is where the tail is. This is really important that you take the time to try to give this shape another meaning, because the folds that people make, there are many errors that they do. And this also will help them remember. They start with an airplane, they convert it into a cow, and then there's going to be another shape that we convert it into to finish this piece. We're going to have this cow limber up, because right now this is a really stiff cow and it's not really good at being flexible. To do this, we're going to have it stand on its 4 legs, and you're going to imagine the tail bending over all the way down to touch the front feet on both sides. So that tail is going to fold over and touch the front legs to make another right triangle. So in this case, my cow has already done this one way, so the tail is swung all the way down to touch the front. And then the tail has to swing the other way. This creates a nice fold that can have the tail go back and forth on either way. I'll stand my cow up because it's tired after all that exercise of swinging the tail back and forth. It'd be interesting to ask students now what shapes they have. Is this triangle an isosceles triangle still, or has it transformed into an equilateral triangle, and how would they be able to tell? Again, having tools available, they would immediately probably jump into the tools. But now we have this parallelogram involved, and that gets pretty interesting because we're going to use that parallelogram to transform our cow, who's standing here recovering from the workout, into a parallelogram. Well, this is a painful process. We need to hold the cow by the nose. And you'll notice I have a finger sliding underneath the cow's muzzle here, and I'll have two fingers on top. That helps hold the cow in position because this is a painful procedure for it. With my other hand, I'm going to take this cow's tail, and I'm going to push down on this back ridge, and I want it to pop down between the two legs. And I'm going to have those two legs close up to form a parallelogram, or, as some of my younger students like to say, it turns into a snowplow. So we have transformed a cow into a snowplow. And if you missed that, I'll do it one more time. We have our cow who has done some limbering up. We grab it by the front to hold on to it. We push down on this top ridge, and that pushes down to make some triangles that are going to touch by putting the tips together. And we have created a snowplow. Now I'm going to ask you to make a bunch of these. And I'll grab another color here. You might want to use two colors, 4 of each color if you have them. If you don't, that's okay. You can use white or whatever color you have. It's more colorful if you use 2 different colors. I'm going to go through the steps one more time to make sure you have it. Obviously, you don't have to keep up with me if you already know it. You can start cranking out your pieces. You will need a total of 8 of these. Again, the suggestion is 4 colors of each. I start the pattern again by folding in half. And I'll crease my lines to make it nice and creased. And then I'll open that up and create the airplane fold. The airplane fold is where I make 2 right triangles that meet in the middle of my square. One thing you'll notice as students start folding, their precision may start off very, very good. But as they get fatigued, around piece 4 or 5, their precision starts going haywire. I always have my students who are very adept at this make some extra pieces, especially for those who struggle with manual dexterity issues. So we always have some extra pieces to share with each other. I'm going to fold my airplane fold in half to turn my airplane into a cow. And then I'm going to take the tail of the cow and have that fold down to the front legs on both sides of the cow. That will form a triangle and a parallelogram if it's done correctly. Once that cow is limbered up, we're going to hold the front end of the cow and push that tail ridge down and tuck it between the cow's legs. So we can push that together to turn the cow into a snowplow. I now have 2 pieces done. While people are folding, I do want to show you an example of what happens when a student folds particularly on getting to the snowplow when they fold the cow incorrectly. And that causes some frustration for learners. So I want you to be aware of that. Please do not follow these instructions because I'm going to do it wrong after I get the airplane fold done. But continue folding, and I'll ask you to look up once I get to that point. And I'm also going to take a quick break here to look at questions that might be flying through. I do apologize that I don't have that screen up to see those questions. Oh, all they see is green. Jeff, are you still just seeing green? Because I see we're seeing green and then we're not. I'm wondering if the projector that I'm using does not show up on the presentation. So if Jeff or anyone else watching can quickly pop off a quick response as to whether you can see the folded paper on the screen now, that would be helpful. I have folded this to the point where I'm at the cow stage, and I want to illustrate a problem that students frequently do. They take the bottom right foot in this case, and they fold it up to the cow's shoulder. So they do make a right triangle, but they fold the wrong end. They don't grab the cow by the tail. They grab it down here where the legs are. And let me show you what that does. That creates a situation where, first of all, they're getting a completely different triangle. They're not getting a parallelogram. So that's one thing that if they're familiar with the shape of a parallelogram, they'll know that they folded it wrong because when they open it up, they don't see a parallelogram. And if they fold it the other way, and they open it up, they no longer can push that tail down. And you can see a faint line here where the fold is. That cannot go in the way it was before, and they get very frustrated. Thank you very much, Lisi, for confirming that everything's okay. So this is an error caused by the cow doing something anatomically it can't, as if someone will argue the tail can't anatomically go down to the front feet. I know, but it's at least more plausible than having the feet come up to its front shoulders. So this is a cow that is now going to go to the meat processing plant, and this piece is no longer going to be usable. So I'll get rid of that. Hopefully we have a few more pieces started. I do want to make another piece or two. And thank you, Jeff, for verifying as well. I'll make one more piece here. I'm going to make a 3-colored one and see if that works. And that might be a good question to ask students. If they look at the finished product, ask them how many different color combinations could they have, and then maybe refine that question. How many color combinations that have symmetry could they have? And I didn't specify what kind of symmetry, and all the math geeks out there are going, ooh, ooh, ooh. I know there's many different types, and there's reflective and rotational symmetry, and everyone else who sits there and says, math? Oh, that's for those other people. Got it. It's still a good question to ask them. How many different color combinations can you have? And does it form a pattern that's consistent? I'm trying mine with 3 colors. I'm going to have my yellow, my green, and this lighter blue. And I'm going to experiment and see, well, can I do this model with these 3 colors and have any symmetry? Now, once they start putting the pieces together, they're immediately going to find an answer. But the question isn't posed to get them to think about right answers versus wrong. It's to get them posed thinking about what's happening here. How are these pieces going to go together? How can we possibly have these snowplow-shaped items fit together in some way to make this transformer. I do see 2 comments. Okay. Just checking on questions again because I saw something flash on my screen. I have 3 now. Could I get an indication from people as to how many pieces they may have at this point? David, how many do you have? Oh, I think we just lost David. Okay. If people could type in the chat how many pieces they have. Oh, I think David is joining us again. Welcome back, David.
I refreshed my screen and lost you.
How many pieces do you have done so far, David?
Let's see. 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
And I'm going for 8. Is that right?
Yes, you're going for 8. And I don't want this to be a race by all means, and you will see learners start racing. This is where having multiple models helps, because some people can go ahead and help with others or make some extra pieces for others. In a digital environment we're in right now, that's going to be very difficult to do in terms of I can't share any pieces with any of you. But I do have some here I could, if that helps any. So I'll fold another piece or 2 here. And then we can show the assemblies. I usually go and wait till some of my slower students have about 4 pieces. And at that point, I might show the assembly instructions next to get some of those people who have been able to fold much quicker, able to start assembling theirs so they can get to a point of completion, because usually after they're complete, they want to share the joy with everybody else, and they come back and help those students who are typically struggling, either due to manual dexterity, they're having errors, they don't remember the steps. It's been wonderful to watch the support that they offer each other once they have finished their model. So I have my cow, tail going between its legs, turning into a snowplow. You'll notice, for those of you who are not familiar, okay, I've got 5 pieces, Jeff, and Lisa, you got 3. The others are not perfect. You know, that perfectness. I am showing you ones that they're not perfect, but they're pretty darn good because I fold paper a lot. But this will take time. And you have some adult learners who want to have the right answer. They want to have a perfect piece. They may sit there folding meticulously. You may hear them get frustrated and crumple up a piece and go, oh, yuck, this piece is junk. I can't make these. When, in fact, it's okay for a first model. And we want to let people know, like everything in learning, you're not going to get it right the first time. You need to allow yourself those safe areas where it's okay to fail. We just need to analyze what could we do to improve each time we make a new one. I'm hoping you have at least 2 pieces right now, and I'm going to pick 2 of them and start this process. I'll give everybody a moment to finish up on the piece they may be working on right now. I like to keep with imagery of what these pieces are, so we're going to go back to the snowplows, and we're going to see why we transformed these cows into snowplow figures. I live in the Northeast, so snowplows are very familiar to me, and I know David has a lot of familiarity with snowplows down in his region. Too much, yes. For those of you who are not in a snow belt, it is quite intimidating to watch traffic follow behind a snowplow. In this case, we have a snowplow in front, and we have a snowplow in back. And the snowplow in front sees a small dog running out in front of it and slams on its brakes. And the snowplow in back can't stop quick enough on the ice and ends up sliding slowly right up into the back side of this other snowplow. So it nestles right in there. And I'm going to show you from a side view what this looks like. These pieces nestle together, and this blue piece can slide back and forth on the yellow. It's sitting on the fold inside here. So that can run back and forth inside here, and you want that to sit down nice and flush. I'm holding with this finger. I'm pushing that down. And then you'll notice with my thumb and my other finger, I'm pinching that where that connects. I might want to slide that a little bit so I have these tips about in the middle of these wings. I just want to pause right there because if a student puts this in upside down, let me show you my snowplow upside down. If they put this in upside down, this is going to really throw them off an awful lot, and they will not be able to do this piece. So you want to make sure that they have their snowplow right side up when they put these pieces together. Now what we're going to do is I usually stick a finger in between the tail pieces here, and I will fold over these tips. And I want to make that not super snug, but I want it to be tight enough so that when I pinch this together, that fold helps hold the blue piece down into these yellow holders. I will flip the piece around and I'll take that yellow tab and fold that in as well. At that point, I should be able to pinch this top, make that a nice crease, and I can pinch the bottom here just to make sure all my folds are good. Now, when I pull on these blue wings lightly, it should slide back and forth. And again, it's those top yellow tabs that are holding the piece in place and friction. So I will slide it so that this blue edge is completely flush with the yellow. And I've created now a new landing spot for the next snowplow. So grabbing my next snowplow, again, I've got it so it looks like a snowplow. It's not upside down, which looks like, you know, maybe a turtle on its back here. We're seeing the underbelly. With the snowplow right side up, I'm going to take it and park it in the back side of these wings. I'm going to slide it back and forth so I can pinch it on the bottom and hold it in place so it's down flush. And then I'm going to open up the back wings here, fold these tips over, and then fold on the other side. Some people could do it without having to flip the model around. I like to flip it around just because I feel like I have a little bit more control with my right hand than my left. Notice how I always turn it back to this position. I want to have this nice smooth line going up as I complete my model, because that way I have the same loading zone and I can't make an accidental flip where I'm going in from the wrong angle or things are upside down. So I have 3 pieces here done. I'm going to grab my yellow fourth one I have just so you can see what half of this looks like. Again, I make sure it's a snowplow. I pick it up, park it between these 2 wings, make sure it's seated on the bottom and pinch it with my fingers. And then I'm going to tuck these tips in. Are there any questions on the assembly process? I'm going to do something no origami student ever wants to do. I'm going to take my finished piece here, and I'm going to show you what that lasts. I'm going to destroy this piece a little bit by taking the last piece out, because the last piece is a bit tricky, and you will find that those students who have never really played with manual dexterity things before or precision, they may have some difficulties. I know Lacey shared that some of her pieces weren't perfect. There will be, mine's a nice perfectly flat wreath. This will not happen for most people's models right off. You won't get a perfectly flat one. You might get one that looks like this, so it's all warped and distorted. So this is typical. If your wreath looks like this when you're done, that's not unusual, because we usually don't pay attention to precision of folding paper. It's not something our culture spends a lot of time learning. But the more time they spend on this, the more precise they'll get and the better their models will get. in a shorter amount of time. It's like any sport or any physical activity. Let me take apart this purple piece here. Actually, it turns out I took apart the green piece. That's okay. So I'm going to assume I've got my model together, but I have this last piece. So here's my snowplow sitting there ready to go. I have my loading bay here, but I have this point that's kind of in the way. You can see right here, it wants to naturally get in the way. For now, I can just move that out back to push it out between these wings so I can park my snowplow in there appropriately like I have been doing. Once I fold my wings, my tips over my wings here, these purple tips over that, I can slide this out and I can see now how the purple piece in back is supposed to fit right in here somehow. It is very helpful if people can slide their pieces to about the halfway point on both ends. So I slid the purple one down. Let me slide this back. My hands are sliding forward, I just realized. I moved this purple one down about halfway along the yellow piece that's connecting it. And I also moved this yellow one about halfway where the purple one is. This allows me to gently pry apart the wings until I can get that tip in there. And then close this around it. Now I might slide that purple one out a little bit and slide the green one in. I might push this whole thing together a little bit. You'll notice this piece down here on the bottom slides in. My goal is, again, get this piece sitting down here. So again, the piece that I started with, my first piece, is sitting nestled in the last piece, nice and comfy. And now I'm going to take these tabs and fold them over so that it goes between the purple and yellow places. It helps if you have fingernails to hold that hole open. I'm going to use my middle finger and use my index finger to tuck that in and fold that over. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to use my middle finger with my fingernail to pry that open. I'm going to take my index finger, fold that over and in. And after that's in, I'm going to crease that to make that a nice solid crease so I can now slide these things around. Status check on pieces. How are we doing? Ooh, David's got his completed. Awesome. For those of you out there in text land, hopefully you've got to the point where you're pretty close on this. I do want to show how you push these together. You grab opposite colors and gently, you may have to shake it a little bit, kind of jerky shake it to break some of the friction of your folds. That's if you are particularly tight with your folds. It may not move easily at first. You may have to break that initial friction. And you can do that a little bit by giving it a little jerky motion. So I push this in as far as it'll go, and then I'll come over to the next color, give that a little push together, and then the next color, I push that together. It is interesting to note here that with construction paper, this is very difficult to do. The friction of construction paper is too much, and the pieces do not slide together well. Your students will get frustrated that they made all these beautiful pieces and they're just not sliding together well. Regular photocopy paper works well. If you have a printing press available at a local technical college, get really friendly with them because you could bring in a couple reams of paper. They go over to their paper cutting machine, and in 35 seconds, you could have all the square pieces of paper you want for your class. It's really, really helpful if you can get a hold of a printing press or some bookkeeping stuff. Lisi shared, we're proud of you, David. Good job. I Have you got yours into a star, David?
No,
Okay.
it's not. It's falling apart, actually.
Okay. And that's the frustration of origami. It's like, darn it, it looked really good, but now when I push it,
Yeah, exactly.
it doesn't look right. And just looking at your model briefly as you were sharing it, the big thing is the tabs. When you're making your tabs, trying to determine how tight it needs to be, how solid the crease is, what's too tight, what's not tight, that takes a few models. You'll have to try it a few times. And Lisa shared that she's glad that this is on video, so you could back it up and repeat it again. I think many people will definitely second that, Lisa. So I would like to open up some thoughts and discussion about this particular model before we jump into the next one. Are there questions you can think of that you would ask students with this particular model or these pieces? I mentioned a few as we were folding. How about the area of these two shapes? And if we think of the area as just the actual paper showing, how would we measure, first of all, the area of this wreath compared to the area of this star? And as I usually would do, I'd ask students to make a conjecture. What do you think? Anybody, David, do you have a guess? If the areas would be the same or if they'd be different?
Well, let's see. The wreath has a hole in the middle. It's sort of a donut. And so if you're calculating the area, you wouldn't want to calculate the hole.
That's right.
So it's possible that they're the same area, but I'm not confident.
And you'll have a lot of conjectures that sound plausible. Many people will say, oh, it should be the same because you have the same number of pieces. Lisa's asking, Ed, is this a representation of the total squares in our initial 4x4 model? I don't think it's quite the same thing. We do a transformation of sorts where we're changing it from an octagon, or is it hexagon, because I believe, no, it's octagon, it's 8 sides. Yeah, an octagon here, and we're sliding that together. And if you count the points, we still have 8 points out here, but obviously we don't have that hole in the center anymore. So that really gets to be the question is, how much area was that hole taking up, and how do we measure that? Now, if they're at the point in their studies where they know some formulas about triangles, and they can break that octagon, the inner octagon, into triangles, they can quickly derive the formulas for what is the area of an octagon. And they can find out what this area would be. And then they can find out what the area of the outside piece is and subtract them. But you don't want to give that to students. You want them to engineer and explore that, because that discovery leads them to some of these formulas that they otherwise might forget without the engineering and discovery phase. I want to jump over to another unit. I call these my paper Legos. And I know Legos got a trademark out there. Please don't sue me. I love Legos. Go use them. But if you happen to have paper, you can make some Legos. These pieces don't look like much. But when I take these pieces, I can slide them together in certain ways that they fit really nicely. And I can start building with this. So for instance, I've already started building over here another shape. You can see how all of these pieces fit together, and I can start making all kinds of shapes. And I would start students off probably making a box, which you can see, quite frankly, I have a 90-degree corner here started. And I would have students make this box first, but then I would open up the challenge of how many sides could you end up having? Is there a maximum? Is there a shape you could do that's smaller than this? So those are some things I pose right at the start to get them thinking, okay, we're making a box, but then once we make the box, there's going to be a challenge of, can we get smaller with fewer pieces and make a shape? And then what would be the maximum number of pieces we could make a shape out of? So this one involves a little bit more work on the individual pieces. So you'll probably only be able to make a couple of these to start. When you take a square piece of paper and fold it in half, just like you did with the first one, we are not going to go to the airplane fold next. We're simply going to fold this in half. There are two ways to proceed with the next step. I'll let you decide which is better. I personally like to open it up, and I'm going to fold my outside edges into the center to make long, skinny rectangles. So these are all parallel lines. I'm not rotating the shape at all. I'm making parallel lines. And I'm going to do that on both sides. So I end up with 4 narrow rectangles, all parallel to each other. Some students get very tired and fatigued with folding, so they may try this method. And you can encourage them to try it and see how it works. These students may fold this in half, and then they will fold this in half as well. And if they fold a half of a half, well, working with our our base fractions, half of a half is a fourth, so we should get 4 pieces that are all equal. The difference here is how the folds are set up. There might be creases one way or the other. And Lacey's sharing that's concept-based, which I think is referring to the other, the area problem we were working with earlier. Or maybe you're looking at the folds. If you could verify that, that would be good. With our 4 parallel lines, I would encourage you to have them in this configuration so that the lines are all parallel going up like a bookcase almost. On the lower left-hand corner, you're going to work with just that bottom shelf of the bookcase, and you're going to fold this tip. This tip is going to go right up to the top of that bookcase, that first piece. So let me fold that over so you can see what that looks like. So again, I have it as a bookcase. I folded just this little dog ear down here to make a right triangle. And then I'm going to tuck that whole first shelf up so that it looks like a rectangle that has a small triangle taken out of the left-hand side. I'm going to rotate the piece 180 degrees, and I'm going to do the same thing again in the lower left-hand corner. And this is the challenge. I see students folding the wrong corner all the time. So always having some pattern they can follow might be helpful. As a bookcase, you're folding the lower left. Of course, some students will bashfully share that they don't know their left from the right, and that's okay. They'll learn it by the time they fold a couple 10 of these. Once I fold that little dog ear, I'm going to fold that into the center now. I now have a rectangle with 2 triangles. Oh, yes, Lacey's sharing. It's the rave right now. Teach them concept, not the rules. I love that, and I'm finding so much mileage. It was very difficult for me to jump into conceptual teaching as a beginning point because I was always trained in the procedures, and that's what I knew. This whole concept stuff was kind of scary to me. I'm now going to turn my piece a little so I have my cutout piece here on the top side. I'm going to fold this tip all the way over so that it lines up and makes a right triangle. I'll fold this out so you can see what it looks like. So now I have a right triangle that covered up that triangular hole I had. So you can see the triangle hole. I covered it up by making a right triangle over it. And then I'm going to rotate my piece again 180 degrees. So again, I have my triangle in the top corner. I'm going to fold the bottom. Whoops. I had to grab my piece here. Sorry about that. I have to grab the bottom corner, fold that up. You now see two right triangles facing each other and creating a parallelogram. Again, if I open each of these up, you'll see my little triangle pieces that were folded over earlier. Those are going to come into play now. I eventually want both of these triangles to be tucked inside where that triangle is. See this piece right here? That little hole that I'm opening up? I want this triangle tip to go inside that pocket. You may want to stick your finger inside the pocket to bulge it out on the outside here, because otherwise it might crease inside, and that crease will prohibit this triangle piece sliding in. So again, let me just show this in a little slower motion here. I'm taking the triangle, I'm tucking it in underneath so that it looks like this. I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees and do that over here as well. Here's my triangle piece that's a flap. I want to tuck it in underneath this piece right here, where my finger is right now. So I'll hold that open with my thumb, and I'm going to take my triangle piece. I may have to fold it a little bit to get it in there, and if I slide it in nice and gentle, I end up with a parallelogram that's nicely packaged. I will do another one of these again in a minute. So if you didn't get that the first time, we will do another piece shortly. I now have this X I can see on one side. On the other side, I just have a single line across the center. We want to flip it over so it only has that single line. And we want to fold. I like to have my shape like this, as a diamond shape away from me with the pointy ends towards me. I want to fold this pointy end right up to this top right-hand piece. So I'm going to fold it right along that length. And what that will do is make another right triangle. We're making right triangles all over the place. I folded that from down here, up here, to make a right triangle. And I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees and do the same thing with this tip. I'm going to fold that right up to make a square. At this point, I have these two little triangular legs, and I have a square on the inside. You can see my square is kind of a little wrinkled because that last fold I did was a little brutal to it. If you turn it upside down, it looks like it's making a little table with only two legs. If you fold this along that X, you can fold it so that it makes almost like a pair of pants. If you fold it on the other fold, it won't make a pair of pants. So that's the wrong way to fold it. So there's one fold that you'll want to do that kind of makes it look like a pair of pants with two legs. And this can open up. This is one of your units. So let's make another one and see how these go together. Now, if people can come up with something like my cow to snowplow thing with this, that would be nice. I've asked students to do it. They came up with the bookcase for me, so I share the bookcase with them, from them to you. I'm going to fold this in half first to make a rectangle where I have two halves. And then I'm going to take each of those halves and cut them again in half by folding a parallel line. So I will end up with 4 parallel rectangles, all of the same dimension. Excuse me. Just checking on questions real quick here. Okay. With this in a bookcase formation where I can see different shelves, I'm going to start at the bottom shelf. I'm going to take the lower right-hand corner. I'm going to fold that over to make a triangle. And then I'm going to fold that bottom shelf up to the center. So that makes a row with a cutout triangle on my left-hand side. Now I'm going to flip around 180 degrees. My cutout triangle is now up here on the right-hand side on the top. In the lower left, the opposite side, I'm going to fold up that triangle and then fold the shelf up so that on opposite corners, my top right and my lower left, I now have a triangle that's been cut out of my rectangle. Going on the opposite corner of one of my cutout triangles, I'm going to fold this corner up to make a right triangle in such a way that this triangle edge lines up with the top of the rectangle I started with. So this makes a right triangle flap here. And you know, some students like at this point, with that triangle flap, they just open the other side up, flop that triangle in, and fold it over. So that first tuck-in isn't so hard. So again, they folded it over to make the triangle. They open it up, open the flap to tuck it in without having to do a whole lot of work. That way, there's only work on the second tuck-in. Again, I have the triangle on my top right. I'm going to grab the lower left corner, and I'm going to fold that up to make another triangle, so I have a parallelogram. This time, this is where I might need to open this socket space up with my finger, and then I'll hold that open with my thumb, this thumb right over here. And then I'm going to take this triangle and I'm kind of fold it inside and gently ease it in. And then I'll reseal all the edges on that, make them nice folds. And I'm ready to flip over the piece. When I flip over the piece, I see I don't have that X in the middle. I just have a one fold. I'm going to turn it so it's a parallelogram standing on its head almost, or on its tip. I'm going to fold the tip of the parallelogram over so that it matches the other vertex on that parallelogram. Notice how we start slipping in the language a little bit, so they start getting comfortable with the vocabulary they're going to be using when they're talking about parts of a quadrilateral. After I turn it 180 degrees, again, I take this far vertex and fold it up so it touches the vertex that's on the same line. I now have like a jack-in-the-box. This opens up. I can flip it over. I can see it's like a table. And I can fold it on the fold that's going to give me a pair of pants. Hopefully at this point, and again, some people may have to stop and start the video again. That's okay. This is a perfect episode for stopping and starting video on playback. Hopefully at this point you have two pieces. What I'd like to highlight, and I'm going to draw them with a nice black marker here. You'll see that I have drawn two black lines where my crisscross X was that indicate a triangle on one side and the other, but this other line goes straight through. You don't want to deal with that diagonal that goes straight through with a crease all the way through. You want to deal with the diagonal that has just this triangle piece right here. So this piece doesn't go all the way across. I mean, there is a fold, but I can fit my finger in here, or I can fit it in here going the opposite direction. So I'm kind of creasing it. You can see there's an entry point here, and there's an entry point here. Can't get the angle on that right. I'm going to take a tip of one of my pieces. I'm going to take the green one actually, and I'm going to slide it into that socket like so. And I can just push that right in and then crease it over a little bit so that I have the piece fitting together. Then I know most of you don't have a third piece available right now, but due to time, I do want to make sure that we have it recorded how this assembly is going to go. I take another piece, and you notice I'm always holding with my left hand. That way I can rotate, slide another piece in, rotate, slide another piece in. Some people find that very easy. I can see I'd like to slide this in here. And then I have this yellow piece out here. I can open this up and flop it over the top to slide it in here. Now I've created a corner that if I push in the middles here a little bit, you can see that creates a corner of a cube. Excuse me. So this shape, it turns out, we're going to make a cube out of this, if we had enough pieces. But I've had students try to fit together 32, 64 pieces to see how big a shape they could do. I even had students take a poster board, and they made pieces that were large out of poster board, and they wanted to see if they can make a shape big enough that they could stand inside of it. And they did that for a holiday season, and they actually made one large enough that we put in the doorway of the classroom so everybody could walk through it like it was an arch. And they engineered that together as a group project, and it was simply holding these things together by these little tabs and inserts. So hopefully people have had some success making these shapes. If not, please post some comments, especially in the links discussion, and we could try to offer some follow-up. There are also some YouTube videos out there on that. I want to show a different context for this. I'm going to go over to my browser. And on my browser, I want to bring you back to the standards for mathematical practice. People have an awful hard time, first of all, making sense of them because they are so gosh darn long. This is an awfully long description for a definition of something because there's a lot of stuff in each one. But as we look through the different standards of mathematical practice, think about how many of them you might have engaged in while you were doing this. Some of these will stand out quite readily. Others, maybe quite a stretch. They're not constructing arguments unless you ask them a question about the area, for instance. How do you know they're the same? Or why would they be the same? What about so-and-so's assertion over here that they're going to be different and one's going to be bigger or lower? This argument that you've established just by asking are the areas the same leads them into that inquiry type thought. And of course, we can look through all of these and find some parallels to some of the thinking that has been done. This is nice because they're doing hands-on activity, they're learning about math, and they're learning about the parts of math, the thinking parts of math, that are often difficult to replicate with a worksheet. Lacey mentioned it earlier in the chat. She said, this is conceptual modeling of what's going on with this mathematics at a conceptual level before they get into the procedural part of things. And it's really nice when they can connect the two, which is ultimately a goal you want. I do want to highlight as well, I like to bring this up because in adult ed, I think in some cases this might be a better curriculum than anything else we have out there. If we can get our adult learners thinking with persistence, managing impulsivity, thinking flexibly, listening, understanding with empathy, all these different habits of mind, I think their chances of success in life are probably better than learning Algebra 2 or trigonometry. But there's all kinds of debates with that. I'm sure we'll get some linked conversations going with that coming up soon. But what I do with these cards is I print them out and I cut them out. And as I see adult learners, demonstrating some of these habits, I will hand them one of these cards and I'll ask them to write on the back what they were just doing and put the date on it. At the end of the week or at the end of a month, we'll compare notes. What kind of cards have you been collecting lately? What have you been getting recognized doing? Are there habits of mind you've never touched before? So again, it's using paper to start learning about thinking, which I know it's not directly tied into origami, but I found that there's a very strong connection of when I introduce origami, I introduce these habit of mind cards, and there tends to be an awful lot of buy-in real quick. And many of these learners have children. And I asked them, take a set of these cards and identify those actions with your children for a week. What things are you finding most often? Is that because you're paying attention to those items more, or because your students are demonstrating them more? How cool would it be for standards if we had little cards like that for standards? We can say, oh, wait, that's one of those standards. We can hand those out. But that's another topic for another week. Are there any questions? Because I am respectful of people's time. We are about an hour in. I normally don't like to talk all the way through. It's much easier when we have multiple people here in audio, if possible. I do appreciate everybody who showed up in text, and I appreciate your typing. That's great as well. Next week, by request, we had some requests for different topics. We're going to explore Twitter next week and take a look at some of the uses Twitter may have in education and how to get started with some of that. And there's some discussions already on the links discussion boards that Lisi has started up about Twitter, and there's been a few people making comments about the usefulness or the application. So if you're a teacher who uses Twitter in your classroom now, really encourage you to stop over into that circle of practice where Lisi's posting the questions about Twitter, and put your 2 cents in. Let us hear how you're using it. And then hopefully next week you could show up and share some of that with us as well. David, do you have any questions or thoughts?
No, this has been fun. I really had not done origami before, so and I could definitely see some interesting things in plane geometry that could grow out of this. One of the things I was thinking about in the first example with the wreath, it became a pinwheel. And I'd never thought about an octagon becoming a pinwheel before. And I don't know what that means. Maybe there is some geometric relationship that I could discover.
And it also opens the door to what other shapes could make other things. Is there a way we can make a unit that we can fold together in a similar way to make, instead of an octagon, what if it made, I don't know, a decagon? What would the unit shape look like, and how would we fold it? That's a challenge you throw out to learners, and you know you have some hands-on learners who are going to dive right into it. They're going to be folding up a ream of paper, trying to figure out these little pieces, and can you make a decagon out of them? And then once you get a decagon, what does it slide together to make? And of course, we can use a little bit of algebraic reasoning to already conjecture how many points would be on that star once it pushed together, or the pinwheel. We can say, well, there was 8 and there was 8. Students could start making conjectures that way too.
Another thing I was thinking about is the relationship between plane and solid geometry that you demonstrated. I mean, you made a solid geometric object from planes, essentially.
Yeah. And all we did was fold them. There was no glue, no scissors. I've done a lot of origami models. The birds, the cranes, all these other things. They're very pretty. They're very artistic. And the engineering that goes into making them is quite impressive. But I wanted students learning how to engineer with pieces they could make, and then maybe engineer the building parts, like Legos. Legos are just bricks. They are beautifully designed bricks that allow people to engineer all sorts of things. It's incredible what people have made with simple little bricks called Legos. So that's why I call these units here paper Legos, because you can make all kinds of different things with this. I had students who made little gift boxes during Valentine's Day or Christmas or some other holiday, and they'd put gifts in them and hang them on the tree. Well, the people in the family didn't want to open the boxes because they knew how much work it was to make one of these things. And they didn't want to destroy the box. So they started coming up with strategies on how to take it apart and put it back together again, which is really cool. If anyone else has any other questions, go ahead and fire away. Otherwise, I think we're going to put a little red bow on this episode and hopefully catch up with everybody again next week. We do this every Wednesday from 7 to 8 o'clock p.m. in Eastern Standard Time. There is a website. I will drop a link in the event channel so everybody has that website where you can see upcoming events, and you can even go to a form that allows you to enter in suggestions for other topics. I've got quite a list started already because people have been helping with some ideas. And pay attention to which ones you like, which ones you don't. There will also be a link to this video on that site. And I hope to have a playlist built on YouTube so you can actually subscribe and get those videos as they're recorded and put up. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. I hope you guys all have a great week.
Thanks, Ed.
Bye, Dave. Bye, everybody in the chat.